Okay, next technique up here, doing some paper casting. So Cal uses a lot of sculptural paper in his work, and he uses molds that he creates with Fimo, and he bakes it, and then he presses his paper pulp. Again, kind of a time-consuming process to make paper pulp, blend it up, all that kind of stuff. So I did some research, and I found a really cool process whereby you can use toilet paper in a very simple way. So what I'm doing is I'm taking some things that have a significant sculptural quality to them. I found a whole bunch of this stuff like at an antique store, like I guess people used to use these to make signs or whatever, but they have like a little bit of relief in them. So what I've done is I've taken some rubber cement, and I spread it all over the place, and I just kind of gently push these into it because I want them to stay in place. I'm gonna let that dry for a bit here while I work on another piece that I have an idea for. So I was thinking, okay, it could be really cool to find some stuff, some leaves that have like a good vein structure in them. So with this, what I ended up doing was I just put some wax paper on here, and again, I used some rubber cement to stick them down. You could probably use stick glue, but it's important that you do this when they're still alive. They're starting to get crispy. I did this yesterday, but I'm hoping they'll still come out pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and show what happens like once you've applied the stuff to your mold or whatever, like whatever kind of like a low relief thing that you want to try this with. This was actually it was a linoleum cut that I made, and I made a stamp out of it for my non-traditional printmaking class. And so it's got relief because I cut relief into it, like with printmaking tools. And so I'm really hoping it doesn't stick. Kind of my first round with doing this ever. I let it dry completely because all the research that I did suggested you'd get a sharper image with that. So I'm just kind of carefully pulling this out. It looks like maybe some of my stuff is sticking pretty badly here. And that's probably because I had leftover ink in this. So if I had a rubber stamp that I hadn't used anything on, it probably would have been okay. So I got some relief in there. I'm not super happy with it. I mean, you can see some of my cuts in there, but I'm feeling like if I tear that first bit of toilet paper off of there, and I'm really careful with it, that it should hold up okay because I pressed it in really, really well. Because that first layer, again, seems to have stuck to some old ink. So I want to see a much cleaner debossment. So like the words embossment and debossment refer to a sculptural quality of paper. So a debossment is stuff that sticks out, and embossment is stuff that like pushes in. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and cut away the stuff I don't want on this. I didn't use any glue or anything for this. The research that I did suggested that the toilet paper sticks to itself pretty well. It's got some sizing in it already, some glue, and it's made to deteriorate, you know, and combine with paper, or water, for waste purposes. So anything with a significant kind of texture or relief aspect to it should work with this, as long as it doesn't get sticky when you add water to it. So like rubber things, metal things. The research that I did was from a lady that uses these like acrylic stamps. I mean, I'm not saying go out and buy acrylic stamps. I mean, that to me, that's not very creative. But acrylic works great because it's like plastic, right? So plastic things would work too. Any kind of a texture that you would have. So it's gonna be difficult for me to get into that area, so I'm probably not gonna waste demonstration time on that. I'm just gonna jump straight into it. Okay, so these are glued down, and I don't have any excess glue on here. I tried to wipe it all off as best I could. And the way this works is you wanna carefully pull off enough toilet paper to get across, right? And you're gonna need at least 4 layers. So since it's gonna take me a couple of layers to get across, I'm actually gonna go with like 8 pieces of this toilet paper in order to get the thing to work. I was thinking about this yesterday when I was working on my first mold, you know, we had kind of like a toilet paper crisis in the beginning of COVID, and I was like, well, I'm glad that we can access it now. So, all right. So the first thing you want to do is kind of wet the surface, right? So I just use a fingertip sprayer that I bought from Walmart. You can use any kind of a sprayer to make this happen. Just want to get a good consistent amount of water all over the surface. And then we begin by laying our toilet paper over the top. Like really gently, right? I'm going to overlap mine so that I get as much of my leaf composition in here as I can. Then my next step is that I want to carefully use a chip brush. I like chip brushes because you can really push these bristles without any fear that it's going to poke through because they're pretty soft, right? So I've kind of gotten it initially pushed down, and now I'm going to add water to the outside because I need this to be wet enough for it to adhere to the mold that I've created. So this is a repetitious thing. And you'll start to see like the texture coming through. Like I can see the vein structure happening here already, so that gives me some hope that this is going to work pretty well. Now my leaves are kind of popping up a little bit. I thought that might be an issue, but I'm kind of hoping it comes out cool anyway. Again, experimentation, that's the name of the game here. I'm going to add a little more water before I get to my next one, just because I want to make sure that I have enough water in between layers that they will have good contact one on top of the other. So again, I like to think about paper mache kind of concepts with this. If I've gone this way the first time, I'll probably come across it this time, just to try to create like a matrix where it's strong. Because as you saw earlier when I was pulling off the paper from the mold, it's pretty delicate. So you want to really focus on getting some good strength in there. And you're going to spray it again. I feel like maybe I should have used like a bigger spray bottle. Now what Cal does with his, like when he makes little paper molds, he doesn't just leave them paper. Sometimes he does, but usually he coats them in some kind of an acrylic paint, and that strengthens the paper so that it's ultimately much stronger. So I'm not brushing, I'm pushing, right? I'm pushing down, kind of stippling kind of thing. And I want to push those wrinkles in as best as I can. Through this process, you're marrying the two layers of toilet paper. And you're kind of pulverizing them a little bit too in the process. I'm pushing pretty hard actually, so it's holding up. More water already. Again, no glue, right? You're just using tissue paper and water. You probably could use like the colored tissue paper, I imagine, if you wanted to. I'm kind of thinking about how cool it would be to maybe like put some fabric dye on these layers to add a color to the paper itself before it comes off, which could be really fun. So again, I encourage you to experiment, try cool stuff. Now I'm gonna go diagonal because I've got a really big composition. Now if it was smaller, like my stamp, when I did this, they all went the same direction. I didn't worry about it too much. More TP. And what I was researching when I was doing this kind of indicated to me that if you have like nicer toilet paper with like a higher ply count or whatever, you might not need quite as much, but you might have to push it harder to get it into the textural elements of whatever it is that you're molding. Now those leaves are laying down better. I feel like the leaves have kind of dried out a little bit and they're probably absorbing a little water. I feel like this should be a lot wetter at this stage of the game. You could even make your own mold by like cutting up a bunch of thick cardstock, gluing it down to like cardboard or something. And then if you paint over it with acrylic paint and let that dry, that'll make it waterproof so that you could get like textures out of that. Okay, I'm gonna go with one more coat here because this would be my fourth. And then I'm gonna be ready to prepare this for setting up. So again, when I was doing research on this, there were a lot of people that sped the drying time up on this. I saw one guy was using like a heat gun that you would use for like construction and industrial things. But then, of course, as I watched his demonstration, he ended up burning the edges of his work a little bit, which I don't advise. However, like a blow dryer might help, or a fan. I just let mine dry overnight because I wasn't too worried about speeding things up. Some people like to take all this off right away. I do not advise that. Because I see when people do that in the demonstrations that I watched, that it's so delicate when you pop it off of there wet. Sometimes it tears across, but also you get the cleanest impressions by letting it dry. That way it can really, really form around whatever it is that you're molding. Looks like my other mold here is not going to be dry before I finish this demonstration, so I'll have to show you later what that looks like. I recommend not cutting all this excess off. Like, you probably want to wait till it sets up so it's stronger and you can cut it with scissors. So, and when I press on it, I can kind of feel the water squishing, so I know it's going to press into the mold pretty well that way. I'm just really, really trying to be very careful to make sure that it is pressed in well, because I don't have a lot of relief on these leaves. So it really needs to be nice and tight to the surface. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a sponge, and I'm going to carefully sponge onto this. And this is a kind of a double function. I'm pressing pretty hard now. I'm kind of pulling out some of the water on the surface, but I'm also doing that final, like, deep impression pressing with the sponge. And it takes all your force of your hand, and instead of being like all on your fingers, it applies it throughout the sponge itself. And that makes it a lot more like even. you have any spots that look like they're not catching good impressions or they're popping up a little bit, then you'll want to go back over it. Okay, I'm liking that pretty well. And again, no scrubbing, otherwise this will just ball up and go away. Last thing, you can either use a towel or paper towels, and what you want to do is just do one final press on that. And the whole idea again is to really push in that last time, but then pull some of that water back off the top. But I'm going to be really careful to pull this back because sometimes when you use a paper towel, it'll stick to the toilet paper. We definitely do not want that. Okay. Now we wait, probably about a day.